Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 15 team selection. I know Game Week 14 has only just ended, but we have a midweek Tuesday evening deadline, so we've only got a couple of days now to choose our teams and make our transfers. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe. But without further ado, let's jump into it. You don't need to adjust your viewing device. That's right, I got a green arrow, which is amazing. I definitely needed it, not only for my enjoyment of the game, but my rank desperately needed it as well. And it was in a week where Erling Haaland did get 2 returns. But as I said, it's sometimes not just about that man, but also about the rest of the players delivering. And my team probably would have been even better with him. But some of the other players, some of them quite cheap, delivered as well. And I actually had 5 double-digit returns in my team, if you include captaincy. But outside of that, 4 double-digit returns. I'm not going to go through and be too smug and boast too much about it, but all of the defenders returned, which in a week where I genuinely thought my defense was one of my weakest spots because I didn't have an Arsenal defender, I was very lucky that they conceded late on due to that Zinchenko mistake, and all 3 of my defenders did very well. Taylor 10-pointer is the stuff of FPL dreams. Very lucky, of course, because Burnley aren't a great defense, but it was the best fixture in the league. His assist was actually very good. The cross was fantastic. It wasn't a lucky assist, so to where we were 10 points from Taylor was brilliant. Trippier getting a 12-pointer was massive because one of the benefits of going with only one premium, i.e. Salah, and dropping Haaland, was to be able to fit Trippier in, because a lot of people now don't own Kieran Trippier. So to have that 12-pointer from him was massive, and I desperately want to keep him in my team, despite whatever my future transfer plans are. Big shout out to Stormzy, the main man who actually captained Trippier this week, and that turned out to be a brilliant decision, one of the top point scorers in the game. The midfield, I actually have returns from absolutely everyone, bar Martinelli, who continues to be very, very frustrating. He did hit the post, but the rest of them didn't do that much. Obviously, we've got an assist from Mbeumo, a goal from Saka, a single assist from Salah, but to be honest, Darwin let him down massively. If Darwin had finished a couple of the chances that Salah set up for him, we could have been looking at a very, very good score for Mohamed Salah. But it was still nice to at least not have a captaincy blank. And then Son and Watkins were the 2 attackers that really delivered for me. Both of them getting a goal, an assist, and some bonus points as well. And it left me in a position where, yeah, big green arrow, 77 points. I'm absolutely delighted. That puts me at around 600k, which is still not a rank I'm overly happy with, but to almost half my rank in the week where I expected it to get further battered, because on paper, Haaland was the best captain. He could have got a hell of a lot more. He missed pretty much an open goal. At the end, he had a bit of poor luck or bad refereeing, which maybe pulled an assist away from him. So, yes, there was a lot of things that went my way this week, but I will absolutely take that. Lots and lots of points on the table, which is wonderful. Let's now look ahead to Game Week 15, which again, as another reminder, Tuesday deadline, so we need to make our decisions quick and fast. So looking ahead to Game Week 15, which is in a couple of days now, I have 2 free transfers and 0.4 million in the bank. The team is largely in a good position. I don't have lots of major issues. I have only one major issue in my team, which in my opinion is obviously the absence of Erling Haaland, and I do want to bring Erling Haaland in Game Week 16. So most of my transfers need to be based around freeing up funds and switching the structure to allow me to get him back into the team. And it is good that I don't have any other issues, because it may be that you went without Haaland, you want to bring him back in, but you've also got 5 or 6 other issues to deal with, and that puts you in a very tricky position. We're going to start with the goalkeepers. I could see myself making a goalkeeper transfer this week, next week, or the week after that. Mainly because, well, firstly, Areola stinks. he's just not keeping clean sheets. He's not even making saves at this point. So regardless of his price, regardless of the fixtures, he's absolutely useless to us. So we've been talking about Raya and Sanchez, who are 2 really good goalkeepers playing for 2 very good defences. And I do quite want to bring in both of those. But in Game Week 14, Nick Pope looks to have dislocated his shoulder, and dislocation of a shoulder can be a long-term injury anyway, but Nick Pope has already dislocated his shoulder in his career a few years ago, and he was out for 3 months, and he needed surgery to deal with that. And you have to remember that with goalkeepers, they're diving on their shoulders constantly, so it's not just a simple case of you put it back in, let it heal, even maybe a bit of surgery, and then you just go back to running. With a goalkeeper, everything that they do requires them to jump on their shoulders, essentially. So I think we're probably looking at a reasonable amount of time out for Nick Pope. Let's see if we get any updates before the deadline. But what that leaves us with is a very, very cheap Dubravka, which we can do Areola or Turner to Dubravka in one single move. We don't have to free up funds to do that. And it allows us to get another Newcastle player in our team, which is not only good for the long term because they are so good defensively, but also for blank Game Week 18, Newcastle play against Luton away. So I don't really normally advocate making goalkeeper transfers, but when your current goalkeeper stinks so much and you have such great opportunity to go to another cheap goalkeeper in Dubravka, or even could still upgrade to Raya or Sanchez, it feels like it's probably a good use of transfers at the moment. So the current plan is probably not to use it this week, because again, unfortunately, in my team, I need to think about moving funds to get Haaland back in. But if you're in a position where you've got 1 or 2 free transfers and the rest of your outfield players look pretty good and you can't see yourself needing it, Areola or Turner to Dubravka could be really nice. Areola and Dubravka rotate very well. So if you're looking for a rotation where you do play Areola sometimes, I would probably do Turner to Dubravka if you're in a similar position to me. But most people probably don't want to rotate Areola in and are probably happy regardless of the fixture just playing Dubravka. So let's wait for the Pope update. We'll discuss it on the deadline stream and maybe in the deadline decisions video, but Dubravka looks like an absolute gem, and I'll be looking to get him in very, very soon. The defence, I still don't have any issues with my defence. The fixtures are starting to turn for a couple of the players, and I am missing the Arsenal defenders. But again, this week, I've already got Gaehke against Bournemouth at home on the bench, and Taylor against Wolves away. I don't really want to play Taylor, but with Gaehke on the bench, if I needed another defender, I've got one there. And then from game week 16 onwards, yeah, maybe my defence starts to need some transfers. But Arsenal have Luton away in game week 15, but after that they've got Villa, Brighton, Liverpool, and Liverpool obviously is in blank game week 18 when you need all of your players there, and then they go on a nice run after that. So really game week 19 is the week after 15 where I would want an Arsenal defender. So I'm thinking, happy enough with my defence this week, have other positions that I need to make my transfers in to get Haaland back in. Do I then want to bring in an Arsenal defender for Villa away, Brighton at home, and Liverpool away? I don't see more than one clean sheet there, which is the Brighton at home game. But even then, Brighton aren't a poor attack, but Villa away and Liverpool away are 2 of the trickiest fixtures in the league, in my opinion, from a defensive perspective. So whilst Arsenal are comfortably the best defence in the league, and they are comfortably the best defenders to own in FPL, you do need to prioritise your transfers. And I just wonder if I need an Arsenal defender right now, or if I can hold off until 19, when I hopefully have 1 or 2 free transfers to use them. So I do want Arsenal defenders, but I'm less convinced that I need them directly now. And that's not just because they conceded in game week 14. It's more so just because, again, I need to use my transfers elsewhere. But very briefly on my defenders, Taylor, not an issue at all, right? Very cheap defender. We saw that he got the 10 points last week. In the weeks where you need him, if he has an okay fixture, there's a chance he does something. And the main thing with Taylor, and the main thing with any cheap defender, especially going into blank game week 18, is that if you need them, they play. You need them to play 90 minutes every week. You don't want a rotation risk cheap defender. So Taylor serves the job. Gaehke is arguably the biggest issue because after Bournemouth at home, the fixtures start to turn for Palace. And whilst Palace have been decent defensively over the last couple of years, they have some key injuries to key players. And with the fixtures the way they are, there aren't many weeks that I want to play a Palace defender. So whilst he's been very good for me up to now, and whilst he was a good purchase at the time, I'm thinking Gaehke is probably up there as the biggest priority in my defence that I need to move on. So if I am to make a defensive transfer at some point, it probably would be him leaving the team. Kieran Trippier, I've been going back and forth on because my head, my heart, everything was telling me you should keep him. But again, I'm looking at routes back to Erling Haaland, and I love a lot of my attackers. I'm thinking it's going to be very, very difficult to get him back in if I don't sell Trippier, but I'm going to just make it work. I don't want to sell him. He's a big differential. He's still like 40 to 50% owned in and around my rank. So that is a massive advantage for me that I've got such a good option that is so lowly owned. And from game week 17 onwards, the next 3 fixtures after that are really, really good for Kieran Trippier. So he won't be leaving my team. Tsimikas is absolutely fine. Liverpool looked very, very shaky defensively in game week 14, which I wasn't expecting at Anfield against Fulham, but he does have some attacking threat. He's pretty decent for bonus points, and also Liverpool have been a little bit better defensively this season. My only concern is this is obviously a midweek fixture. Do I think that Tsimikas will start this, or do I think Gomez might get the nod? I'm not sure at the moment. I'll have to think about it, but there is a chance that Tsimikas doesn't start this, and if that's the case, maybe I should start Gaehke this week because he's got Bournemouth at home. I don't think that would force me to sell Tsimikas because obviously he's got Palace in game week 16. But it may just influence my thinking as, do I start Gaehke or do I start Tsimikas? And I'm glad I've got that option there on the bench. But Tsimikas for me, we're staying for the next couple. But along with Gaehke, around game week 16, 17 onwards, I do need to probably just make 1 or 2 defensive transfers. And then I've got Reece James. Reece James will divide a lot of opinions. It really depends on the way that you play FPL, but also your prior experiences with Reece James. If you've been hurt by him in the past, then you'll probably say, James is a troll, he'll just get booked, suspended, whatever it is, injured, and it's just not worth the hassle, and Chelsea are very unpredictable. And all of that stuff is true, but Reece James is still an excellent option when he's on the pitch. So as long as he's not getting injured, and as long as he starts to look a little bit fitter, because in the last couple, he has still lacked a bit of fitness, I back the Chelsea defence, I back the fixtures that are coming up as well for Chelsea, and I back how good he is going forward. Regardless of what you think about Reece James, he is an incredible attacking fullback. And I think for that reason, over the period from sort of game week 16 to game week 22 for Chelsea, he offers me a fantastic option that could get that 12, 15, 18 pointer. I mean, we saw it recently with Trent, right, in game week 14. Trent, I think it was like a 12 or 13 pointer he ended with against Fulham. He didn't keep a clean sheet. In fact, they conceded quite a few goals, but the amount of attacking threat that Trent carries, and James is in that same boat, means that they can still get those monster hauls for you. So Reece James is such a high upside pick that I want to keep him in my team. Trippier and James feel so good going into every single game week. The only slight concern, I suppose, is do I know that James will start the next two games in 15 and 16, being in close succession? No, I don't, but it's a risk that I am willing to take. So I'm not saying this is a great defense. There are issues coming up, right? Trippier and Taylor are fine, but Tsimikas, James and Gahey offer their own issues around fixtures and minutes. But is it a massive disaster? No. And the only players that I desperately do want to get in are sort of Zinchenko, Gabriel and Saliba. And I think maybe I can potentially wait until sort of 18, 19. So moving on to the midfield, and I'm now in a position that I'm actually very, very happy with my midfield. If I had unlimited transfers, i.e. I was on a wild card, 4 of these midfielders would be staying in my team. So it tells me that I am very, very close to the ideal midfield, at least in my personal opinion. I think it's very obvious the player that I don't particularly want in my team, but the fixture this week isn't terrible. But Salah, Son, Saka and Mbeumo, you've got 4 players that are pretty much nailed in their teams, on penalties, decent fixtures coming up as well. And data's there as well. And they're just very talismanic, all 4 of them. If their teams score goals, you generally expect them to be involved. I know that didn't necessarily go that way in game week 14, but generally speaking, you expect them to be involved in a high quantity of their team's goals. So they just feel like 4 perfect players to own. I mean, Salah, I don't really need to discuss. I think he's a fantastic captaincy option this week. I'll just throw a seed of doubt in your mind. This feels like a fixture where if Salah's going to get a rest, and he may not, he might start all 38 games, but if he is going to get a rest, this feels like a fixture to give it to him. They are the worst team in the league, Sheffield United. It's a midweek game, and it's away. And I think there have been games in the past. Was it like Palace away a couple of years ago? I remember Salah got benched. He then come off the bench and scored 2 goals. But this feels like an okay fixture to rest Salah if he was going to need a rest, not that he will. So I'm not trying to create rumours or anything like that, but I am just maybe slightly concerned about Salah's minutes more so than I normally am, but I'm probably worrying over nothing. But listen, Salah's fine. You don't need me to convince you of that. Saka has also been delivering, and I think people think, again, I have an agenda against Saka. I don't, but his data has been average this season, but he finds a way to get points. And again, very, very nailed, and in this busy period coming up, that is a massive advantage. So Saka is a player that I'm perfectly happy to hold. And again, if he is on penalties, fantastic. Take some corners too. There is a lot to like about Saka. And despite the days not being great, I'm definitely happy to hold him and hopefully continue to deliver FPL points. Son, obviously getting 2 attacking returns against Man City. That's fantastic, but I knew I wanted to hold Son anyway. I knew that he'd still get chances, and I know when Son gets chances, he tends to finish them. And I know that Spurs will still score goals in the absence of Maddison. And even with all of their injuries, you knew that Postecoglou would still go for it. West Ham at home is a fantastic fixture, and I would go as far as saying a genuine captaincy option. And again, please don't think that's in relation to the fact that he just scored 2 goals, or he got 2 returns in game week 14. Regardless, Son against West Ham at home feels like a fantastic fixture for him. So no need for me to sell Son this week. Mbeumo against Brighton away, fine fixture. Brighton have not been good defensively this season. I don't need to tell you that. And it feels like a good fixture for Mbeumo. Brighton will push high up the pitch, especially playing at home, and it should leave some space in behind for Mbeumo. He did get an early sub in game week 14. I didn't see anything around that being an injury or a knock. He doesn't appear to be flagged on FPL, but it is a little bit concerning that he came off early. I would assume he picked up some kind of knock, because otherwise, why'd you sub Mbeumo off? We've never seen that in the past, but we'll keep our eye on that. Regardless, I think he'll be fine. If you've got a decent bench, I wouldn't sell him even if he was out. But I think we should be fine with Mbeumo. And we know that when he's available, he is absolutely nailed on, which is a massive advantage over this busy period. The 5th and final midfielder is Martinelli. And this is the big issue in my midfield. But it's Luton away. That being said, Luton have actually been decent at home this season. So I don't think this is a fantastic fixture. But it also feels weird selling an excellent attacker in Martinelli against Luton away. But he has had a lot of minutes recently, Martinelli, and he's still not quite clicking from a goal-scoring attacking perspective. He got a little bit unlucky in game week 14 at points, but in a similar way to what I said with Salah, if you are going to rest some of your attackers, a midweek fixture against Luton feels like a place to do it. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Martinelli start on the bench, or if he does start, come off around the sort of 55th, 60th minute. Maybe it's going to be an earlier sub than usual. So I've got my eye on him. It is a position where I would be very, very happy to make a transfer this week. Downgrading to a Palmer, downgrading to a Gordon, downgrading all the way to a bench fodder to free up lots of funds and staying in a 3-4-3. I have a lot of options for that midfield spot, and I don't know. I don't know if it's a sort of sunk cost fallacy, which is I've held on to him for this long. I've invested money, I've invested time into Martinelli. I'll just keep him for one more week. You get that sometimes. You've owned a player and they get a few blanks in a row and you feel like, well, I've owned them for this long, I should give them one more. And it's also gambler's fallacy. We feel like Martinelli's blanked 4 or 5 game weeks in a row. There's no way Martinelli blanks a 6th game week in a row. So I've got all of these biases going on in my head. Maybe the thing to think about is his data's been crap. He's not been very good. Just sell him. And maybe I will. So Martinelli definitely the bigger issue of the 5 midfielders. But the other 4, I'm really, really happy with. I think Martinelli to Palmer or Gordon would probably, in my opinion, make that the ideal midfield 5. So really happy with how it looks. Let's move on to the forwards and then take a look at my transfer plans as things stand for Game Week 15. So moving on to the 3 forwards. And I'm in a bit of a tricky position because across the next 3 or 4 transfers, i.e. by Game Week 16, when I want to go into Game Week 16 against Luton with Haaland in my team, I need to sell 2 of Darwin, Watkins, Alvarez. I can only keep one of them because one of them has to become Haaland, and then the other one will need to be sold down to a bench fodder to allow me to then have the funds to upgrade to Haaland. So I can only keep one of Darwin, Watkins, Alvarez, and that's a very tricky decision. I think on paper, not just based on Game Week 14, but based on the season in its entirety, based on the data, the points, the minutes that we know he'll get, Watkins is the best of the 3 to keep alongside Haaland. I do think that. But my concern with Watkins, I mean, the fixtures are okay, but the next couple are pretty difficult. But I can get over that because I think Man City at home against a Rodri-less Man City could be a decent fixture for him. We saw that Man City at the moment, they can be got at. So it's not the fixtures, it's the price. And you'll see this when we move on to my transfer combinations in a second. It will start to make a lot more sense. But I find it very, very difficult for free and sometimes even for a -4 to get to Haaland and keeping Watkins. It makes it so much easier. Well, firstly, if I had Alvarez and Haaland, because Alvarez is the cheapest. If I keep Darwin, it makes it a little bit easier, a little bit harder, but it's still possible. If I keep Watkins, again, we'll discuss this in a second. When you look at the possible transfers that I could make, it makes it very, very difficult. So I'm in a tricky position. Do I just find a way because Watkins is objectively a better option than Darwin and Alvarez? Or do I just bin off Watkins, bring him back in when my structure's a little bit more sound, and maybe that would push me towards a free hit in Game Week 18. These are some of the things I need to think about because I've got 2 free transfers this week and I'll have 1 free transfer next week. So I've got 3 transfers ideally to get Haaland in, maybe a 4th if I take it. So I need to think, what is a transfer that I can make this week, which puts me in a good position going into next week to get Erling Haaland back in? And one of them is Watkins down to bench fodder, Mabama, or if I can afford it, an Archer or Semenyo, but probably Mabama. Watkins down to Mabama would then mean that I play Alvarez this week, which I don't necessarily hate, even though he's not got a great fixture. And then that would give me the money in the bank plus 2 transfers next week to then think about bringing Haaland in. I do think I need to use a transfer this week, probably on downgrading one of those forwards to a bench fodder. And whilst Alvarez down to bench fodder makes the most sense this week, and also from a quality perspective, Alvarez is the easier one to keep because he's so cheap. So I am in a bit of a tricky position. I think if Darwin's fixtures were poor from now, you could make a case to sell Darwin, but I don't think unless we get news that he's not going to start, which I don't think we'll get before the deadline, I don't think you can bench I don't think you can sell Darwin before Sheffield United and Crystal Palace. It just doesn't feel good, especially with the injuries that Palace have at the moment. Those are 2 great fixtures, and even if we don't think Darwin starts both, if he gets 120 minutes against Sheffield United and Palace, that looks like a really, really good chance for some points. So I'm in a bit of a tricky position. Before you comment down below and tell me which ones you think I should sell and keep, I'll show you how that affects my possible transfers. But that is the team for Game Week 15. I think I'm close. I think the defence is good, 4 of the midfielders are good, and I have 3 forwards that I can choose between which ones I want to keep. So it's really, once I get Haaland back in, I think my team is, unfortunately, a little bit more template, but also very close to the ideal team that I would want. So that's the team. Let's move on to my watch list and then look at those transfer combinations and discuss which ones I'm currently leaning towards. So very briefly, just looking at my watch list before we then look at the possible transfer combinations to get Haaland back in for 16. And I know we are in 15, not 16, but because I have 2 free transfers now and I want to bring him in 16, I need to think about how I use those transfers to make the switch. Defense-wise, Dubravka is still high up on my list, and I would like him, but I wonder if I need to prioritise some other transfers first and then think about bringing Dubravka in. And again, it will depend on the injury update that we get around Nick Pope. Defence-wise, I've only got 3, and they're all Arsenal defenders. Zinchenko, Gabriel, Saliba. Saliba is still the one I want the most, but funds will make that very difficult, I'm sure. And for now, I don't think it's a priority for me with my current team and setup to bring in an Arsenal defender. So, defence, I love them, and I would like to bring all 4 of these in ideally, but I don't think I'll be prioritising those this week. With the midfield, I could make a midfield transfer this week. Remember, I could downgrade Martinelli, and that would again get me closer to where I want to be to get Erling Haaland back in. And I've got 3 on the list here. The 2 that I want are Palmer and Gordon. But in some of the possible transfer combinations, I can't afford either. And in a lot of them, I can't afford Gordon. So I am probably leaning Palmer at the moment, despite me thinking that Palmer and Gordon is a very close call. And I actually think Gordon has more open play goal threat. But I just think I need to obviously make it work with the funds, and Palmer makes that easier. I've put Lo Celso on here. Again, if you watched my Game Week 14 deadline stream, and I think the deadline decisions video, I mentioned Lo Celso a couple of times. I think he's a quality player. I think his creativity is really good. His numbers tend to be good when he plays, and he's so cheap that if I can't afford Gordon and Palmer sometimes, I'm thinking, could I take a punt on Lo Celso? Are his minutes 100% secure? No. Is he going to go out there and get me tons and tons of points? No. But is he a good filler for now? Whilst I try and get my team structure back to where it needs to be, he could potentially be so. And I like the West Ham at home game too. So those are 3 of the midfielders I'm considering. And then there is this unknown strike, you might not have heard of him, Erling Haaland, that I want to bring in for Game Week 16. I have gone back and forth on the idea of maybe bringing him in for 15. But the fact that Rodri's suspended, the fact that it's a difficult game, and also the fact that I don't think I could do it for anything less than a -4, maybe a -8, I am still leaning towards bringing him in for Game Week 16. So that's the current watch list. Those are the players that I'm eyeing up. Let's now go through, in the least complicated way possible, some of the possible ways that I can get back to him in 16. Right, I can only apologise for this next section, which is probably going to be messy because my brain's a bit messy. The game week's only just ended. We've got another game week on Tuesday, and I desperately need Erling Haaland back in because I'm sick and tired of trying to watch Man City games when I don't own him. So bear with me. But basically, to simplify it, I've got 3 transfers to use in Game Week 15 and 16 because I've got 2 frees now, and I'll get a third or a free transfer in Game Week 16. So 3 free transfers, that's a tongue twister, to bring Haaland back into my team. I'm happy with 4 of my midfielders, and selling my defenders, unless I sell Trippier, which I don't want to, doesn't benefit the sort of way that I need to get him back in and my structure. So what that essentially means is Martinelli, and then my 3 forwards, i.e. those 4 players, Alvarez, Darwin, Watkins, Martinelli, those are the 4 that I can sell to allow me to bring Erling Haaland back in. Now, in an ideal world, as I said, it would be Martinelli, Darwin, and Alvarez sold. I'd keep Watkins. I'd sell Martinelli for Palmer. And I'll show you that, in fact. Martinelli would go to Palmer because I think he's the best option at that price. I would keep Watkins. Darwin, for example, would become Haaland, which would be lovely. And then I would like Alvarez to become Mabama. But I only have 3.3 million. So you can understand that using my free transfers, that doesn't work. I need to find 1 million. Now, at this point, I could potentially still make those moves, and then I would have to sell one of my other players to free up at least 1 million, maybe more if you consider price changes. So I would then still have to sell either Son, Saka, maybe Trippier, which I still don't want to do down to an Arsenal defender. Or the other option is that it isn't Watkins that I keep, and it's either Alvarez or Darwin, which makes it a lot easier for me. So, you know what? I'm going to keep Palmer and Haaland in there because they're the ones that I ideally want to bring in. And let's actually say that in this spot, we keep Alvarez and we go Mabama here. You can see that at the time of me recording this, and again, price changes might influence this, I can afford it. And why I think that doesn't necessarily matter, even if there are a couple of price changes, is I could then do like Gaiki down to a 4.4 or 4.5 million pound defender if I need to free up a little bit more funds, which I don't mind doing because I don't want Gaiki anyway, and that would only be for a -4. So from a minimizing hits, getting Haaland back in, getting the midfield I want, the best option for me is to keep Alvarez, switch to a 3-5-2, and then have my perfect midfield, have Haaland who I want, and then I sacrifice that second forward because I get to keep Trippier. And I think that I would like the idea of keeping Trippier more than I do keeping Watkins and sacrificing Trippier. But it is a difficult one. And you may say just sacrifice Saka or Son or Mbeumo or something like that. Maybe sacrifice Reece James, which is a possibility. But Reece James going down to a 4.2 or 4.3 seems terrible in the long term, especially looking at blank Game Week 18 and the busy Christmas period. And I do just want to keep Kieran Trippier. And I don't think you can really argue with that when you look at his points and the things that he can do. I mean, 0.9 expected goal involvement in that game. Kieran Trippier, and he hit the crossbar with a free kick. I don't want to sell the man. So that's what makes the most sense. Now, if I actually go back and keep Darwin in, just to show you the final option of what I can do, and keep Darwin, so a Haaland and Darwin front two, I then need to find 0.4. And again, that's not overly easy. I think I have three options here. Gahey down to a 4.1. So it would be Gahey down to Lascelles, which works as long as Botman doesn't come back soon. Reece James down to a 4.5, which isn't the end of the world, but Reece James is a player that I want to keep. Or rather than Palmer, I do go for someone like a Lo Celso, who's at the moment 4.8 million. He might go up because obviously he's scored, but that's the other option there. I guess it needs to... What it comes down to is, am I happy having Alvarez as my second forward? If the answer to that is no, then what I ideally need to do is work out how do I want Darwin or Watkins, and based on that, how is the best way to accommodate having them in the team. Just a note, by the way, because I know people will say, maybe I haven't spotted this. If I do go for Haaland and Alvarez, and Mbeumo, who doesn't play, I am locking myself into a free hit in Game Week 18. So I'm fully aware, because Mbeumo won't play, Haaland and Alvarez blank, and I have Mbeumo. And on top of that, I have some other players with pretty tricky fixtures, like Tsimikas against Liverpool. So that would lock me in. But I think I'm leaning towards a free hit anyway. So I think that would be the plan regardless. Because the teams with the best fixtures in Game Week 18, Aston Villa play against Sheffield United at home. So Watkins, Diaby, Cash are players that you might want to own. Chelsea have a good fixture, but I've already got two. Spurs have a good fixture. I've only got Son. I might want a Brennan Johnson or a Pedro Porro. Might be a decent option. And then Newcastle play against Luton away. And ideally, I would quite like to have Gordon and or Isak. So I think I'm leaning towards a free hit in 18 anyway. I don't mind the idea of locking myself in. This is the plan that makes the most sense. But it leaves me with Alvarez. I've just not been convinced by him recently. His stats actually against Spurs, 1.07. His expected assists are always off the charts. Like, it's been really good. Again, against Bournemouth, 0.96 expected assist. I've just not been very impressed with him. And I think that rotation-wise, obviously as soon as De Bruyne is back, I think it'll be a major rotation risk. But even so, he just looks like he needs a bit of a rest. He looks like he needs a benching to spark something back in him. And I've seen a lot of City fans calling for Alvarez to be dropped. So I wonder if that's going to put me in a difficult position long term. The other option I have is doing that and keeping Alvarez and Haaland. And then maybe towards Game Week 18 or even the week after that, I don't have to keep Alvarez. Could go to a Solanke. Right, because Solanke's fixtures in 17, 18, 19 are Luton, Forest and Fulham. So maybe I stick with this idea of keeping Alvarez, getting the team that I want, and actually think, do you know what, I might go from Alvarez to Solanke in 17, but then I've still got that cheap second forward, which puts me in a tricky spot moving forward if the cheaper forwards don't perform. These are all the things I'm thinking about. I told you it was going to be messy. There isn't, I don't think there's an obvious answer of yes, that's definitely the way. But if I were to say at the moment what is likely, to recap that, it's that my next three transfers will be Palmer, Mbeumo, and Haaland in. And going out would be Martinelli, Darwin, and Watkins. So my final comment on that is, do I do Watkins to Mbeumo this week? Or do I do Martinelli to Palmer this week? And that right there is a very difficult question. Again, I don't think there's an obvious answer to that, because Martinelli's got the easier fixture. He's got Luton away, but Martinelli is not as great of an option. Watkins plays Man City at home, which on paper isn't an easy fixture, but they are Rodri-less because he's suspended. And Watkins is a better player in FPL at the moment than Martinelli. So I would need to think about how I prioritise the transfers in that position. I need to make one of them this week, and I'll almost definitely roll the second. So once more to recap, Palmer, Mbeumo and Haaland coming in is the most likely, which leaves me with Haaland and Alvarez. And I then have the option to move to a Solanke if I want to, or someone like that, like a cheaper forward. And I then need to decide this week, is it Mbeumo for Watkins that I do to free up the funds, or is it Martinelli to Palmer? I leave him in a 3-5-2 with with Darwin and Alvarez as the front two. probably. Maybe Darwin and Watkins as the front two. So I'll leave it there. Final thing just to note is my AI recommended transfers according to Fantasy Football Hub. I always find this quite interesting just to see what do the AI think I should do. Maybe I'm too biased by the sort of moves that I want to make. They don't really care about Haaland for the time being. They think that James to Gabriel is a transfer that I should make. And it's probably what I should have done in the first place, going for Gabriel rather than Reece James. And then the alternative option that they recommend is Mbeumo to Bowen, which I find remarkable. But the reason for that, and you might think that's a terrible piece of advice, is because of Game Week 18. So they are taking into account that if you add up the projections and you're maybe struggling without a player in Game Week 18, Bowen has an okay fixture, and over that time, he's going to get close to averaging what Mbeumo would. So I don't hate the idea, especially if your team's in a bad position for 18, but I've just brought Mbeumo in. I think I can get away with either benching him in 18 or free hitting. So for me, that's probably not very likely. So those are my current transfer plans. Those are the AI transfers. All a bit messy at the moment. I will clear that up ahead of the deadline stream and before the Game Week 15 deadline. I would love to know down below in the comments, though, what is your plan for Game Week 15? If you don't have Haaland in particular, what is your route to getting back in? So guys, there you have it. That is a Sunday evening team selection video, which we don't have very often. Just as a final reminder, in case you ignored all of my other reminders in the video, Tuesday evening deadline for Game Week 15, and then there's a Saturday morning deadline as per usual for Game Week 16. So deadline's coming thick and fast. This is when we love FPL. We can watch lots of games, hopefully get loads of points. And if you don't, then there's not long before you can bounce back with a green arrow. Hopefully you did enjoy today's video, and if you got any use out of it, or if you enjoyed the entertainment, please do smash that like button. Make sure to subscribe as well. We are trying to hit 110,000 subscribers by the end of 2023, which is ambitious, but I would really appreciate the support. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.